Tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Blind Trust. West and West Blackwood placed the last box on the kitchen counter of their new dream home, a craftsman-style masterpiece nestled in the prestigious Oak Ridge neighborhood. At 42, West had finally achieved what everyone called the American dream. A successful engineering firm specializing in disaster-resistant structures, a beautiful home, and 15 years of marriage to Adrian Blackwood, a striking and ambitious real estate developer. Is that everything from the car? Adrian asked, barely looking up from organizing wine glasses in the custom cabinet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, accentuating her sharp cheekbones. Last one, Wes confirmed, his broad shoulders relaxing as he surveyed the spacious kitchen with its gleaming surfaces and top-of-the-line appliances. This house represented everything they'd worked towards since their wedding day. West had met Adrian during a campus mixer at Northwestern University. He had been a scholarship student studying engineering while working nights as a security guard. Adrian came from money, but had ambition beyond her trust fund, pursuing business with a ruthlessness that both attracted and intimidated him. Their romance had been fast and intense. West proposed 6 months after their first date, much to the surprise of his blue-collar parents. As West unpacked kitchen items, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Garrett Reeves, his closest friend since their time deployed together in Afghanistan. Garrett had saved West's life during an ambush, taking a bullet in the process. The text was simple. First barbecue at the new place better be epic. Need beer, recommendations. West smiled, typing back, "You're still on for dinner Saturday?" The response came immediately, "Wouldn't miss it." "Is that Garrett again?" Adrienne's tone had an edge that West pretended not to notice. She'd never warmed to his military friends, particularly Garrett. "Remind him to leave his gun collection at home this time. He's bringing a housewarming gift," West said mildly. "And Garrett's always carried. It's just who he is." Adrienne rolled her eyes, returning to her organization project. "Just make sure he doesn't tell those horrible war stories again. The Prestons will be here, and Alan's considering investing in my riverfront development." West watched his wife carefully arrange the expensive crystal they'd received as wedding gifts, noting how her manicured hands moved with precise efficiency. Lately, she'd been working longer hours, returning home with her perfume slightly different, her lipstick refreshed. Small details that needled at the back of his mind. That evening, as they christened their new bedroom with champagne, Adrienne's phone chimed repeatedly. She checked it with what seemed like forced casualness. "Everything okay?" West asked, handing her a crystal flute. "Just work. The Davenport property is proving complicated." She took the glass, fingers brushing his. "I might need to meet with the investor tomorrow. On a Sunday. Anyone I know?" Something flickered in her eyes. New money. From Phoenix. Into commercial developments. She raised her glass. "To new beginnings." The words hung between them as they clinked glasses, West unable to shake the feeling that the sentiment held different meanings for each of them. Saturday's dinner party introduced a new character into their lives. Dominic "Dom" Vega arrived as Alan Preston's associate, a smooth-talking real estate investor with perfectly styled dark hair and an expensive watch that he checked too frequently. When he shook West's hand, his grip was challenging, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Beautiful home," Dom commented, looking around the living room with an appraising eye. "Adrienne tells me you designed some of the reinforcement features yourself." West nodded. "The foundation's built to withstand an 8.5 earthquake. Professional hazard. I see potential disasters everywhere." "Fascinating," Dom replied, his gaze drifting to Adrienne as she poured wine across the room. "Your wife has quite an eye for potential." Later, West observed from the kitchen as Dom leaned close to Adrienne on the patio, speaking intently. When she laughed at something he said, her hand briefly touched his arm, lingering a moment too long. The wine bottle in West's hand suddenly felt slippery. Garrett appeared beside him, his military-trained eyes missing nothing. "Who's the slick guy with the Rolex?" "Dom Vega, some hotshot investor. Adrienne might do business with him." Garrett's expression darkened. "I don't like him." "You don't like anyone," West chuckled, but the sound felt hollow. Not true, Garrett countered. I like people who aren't full of shit. He nodded toward the patio. That guy's a predator. Watch yourself. West dismissed the warning, but that night, he woke at 2 a.m. to find Adrienne's side of the bed empty. He found her in the home office, quickly ending a phone call as he appeared in the doorway. Who was that? He asked, voice rough with sleep. Just checking on Martinez closing. Go back to bed. Her smile seemed forced, fingers tapping nervously on the desk. West hesitated, then retreated, missing the relieved exhale that followed his departure. The next morning, West's parents, Frank and Eleanor Blackwood, arrived for Sunday brunch. Frank, a retired construction foreman with calloused hands and straightforward speech, embraced his son warmly while Eleanor fussed over the new house. It's certainly grand, Eleanor commented, her simple dress and practical shoes marking her as someone from a different social circle than their sophisticated neighborhood. Adrienne maintained her perfect hostess smile, but West caught the slight strain around her eyes. She'd always struggled to connect with his parents, finding their working-class sensibilities at odds with her curated lifestyle. During brunch, Frank asked bluntly about their plans for children, a topic that had become increasingly sensitive. West and Adrienne had been trying unsuccessfully for years, their last round of fertility treatments depleting their savings and straining their relationship. We're focusing on our careers right now, Adrienne answered smoothly, refilling wine glasses to change the subject. West's firm is bidding on the new community center, and I'm expanding into commercial properties. Eleanor studied her daughter-in-law thoughtfully. You seem different, Adrienne. New hairstyle. Just stressed. Eleanor, Adrienne replied with a tight smile. These deals involve a lot of late nights. The conversation moved on, but West noticed his mother's concern. As they were leaving, Eleanor pulled West aside. Something's not right with her, she whispered. I've been married 43 years. I know that look. What look? West asked, sudden tension in his shoulders. Eleanor patted his cheek gently. The look of someone with secrets, honey. Be careful. That night, Adrienne announced she needed to fly to Phoenix for 3 days to meet investors. West offered to rearrange his schedule and join her. No need, she said quickly. It'll be all meetings and paperwork. Besides, don't you have that structural review for the hospital wing? West did, and the timing made it impossible to accompany her. As he drove her to the airport the next morning, she was unusually animated, checking her appearance repeatedly in the visor mirror. When he leaned in to kiss her goodbye, Adrienne turned her head slightly, his lips catching the corner of her mouth instead of full contact. I'll call when I land, she promised, already walking away, rolling her designer luggage behind her like she couldn't escape fast enough. West watched her disappear through security, the unease in his stomach growing into something he could no longer ignore. Chapter 2. Fracturing Truth. 3 weeks after the Phoenix trip, West found the first concrete evidence that something was wrong. Reviewing their joint account statements for tax preparation, he discovered a series of large cash withdrawals totaling nearly $50,000 over 2 months. When confronted, Adrienne had a ready explanation. It's for the Westridge incentives. Some of these investors only respond to cash sweeteners. She kissed his cheek. I was going to tell you after the deal closed. It's all going back in once we secure funding. The explanation was plausible. West's new development deals often operated in gray areas, but something in her delivery felt rehearsed. That night, unable to sleep, West checked their safe and found Adrienne's passport missing, despite her having no scheduled international trips. The next morning, he called her office on a pretext and learned she had taken the day off, despite telling him she had meetings until late evening. Increasingly troubled, West called Garrett. I need a favor, West said after explaining his concerns. But it might cross some lines. Garrett didn't hesitate. For you? Name it. The next day, Garrett provided West with a small tracking device. Military grade. Undetectable on normal sweeps. Battery lasts 3 weeks. When West hesitated, Garrett added, You don't have to use it. But if you're right about something being off. That evening, while Adrienne showered, West placed the tracker in the lining of her primary briefcase. Within days, a pattern emerged. Adrienne's lunch meetings frequently took her to an upscale apartment building in Westlake, where she would spend precisely 90 minutes before returning to her office. On Thursday, West followed her himself, parking across from the luxury high-rise with tinted windows and a discreet entrance. When Adrienne emerged 2 hours later, she was accompanied by Dom Vega, his hand possessively pressed against her lower back. Before they parted, they kissed deeply, unaware of West's presence across the street. The betrayal struck West like physical pain, but he forced himself to drive away without confrontation. Instead, he increased his surveillance, documenting times, locations, photographing their meetings. He discovered the affair had been ongoing for at least 6 months, possibly longer. During this period, Adrienne suggested they take a weekend trip to reconnect. "We've both been so busy with work. Let's drive up to Cascade Lodge, just the two of us." Her sudden attention felt calculated now, her affection hollow. West agreed, playing along while secretly backing up his evidence to secure cloud storage and sharing access with Garrett as insurance. The night before their planned trip, while Adrienne slept, West found a burner phone hidden in her gym bag. The messages between her and Dee painted a sickening picture. "Dee, is everything set for the weekend?" "Hey, yes. Mountain route, just as planned. No guardrails for half a mile along the ridge." "Dee, clean break? No connection to us?" "Hey, tragic accident. Grieving widow. He'll never see it coming." "Dee, after it's done, we'll have everything. His company, the insurance, all of it. Hey, and each other. No more hiding." West photographed the exchanges, his hands shaking with adrenaline and betrayal. The wife he'd loved for 15 years was planning his murder. Instead of confronting her, West continued the charade, secretly meeting with his attorney to update his will, removing Adrienne as beneficiary and executor, naming his parents instead. He documented the conspiracy evidence and placed it in a secure lockbox with instructions for Garrett if anything happened to him. The night before their trip, Adrienne was unusually attentive, preparing his favorite meal and initiating passionate sex that now felt like a grotesque farewell gesture. Afterward, while she slept, West placed hidden cameras throughout their home and installed a recording app on his phone. Saturday morning dawned clear as they loaded the car for their weekend getaway. Adrienne insisted on driving, claiming West seemed tired. As they wound through mountain passes, West activated the recording on his phone, capturing Adrienne's increasingly tense behavior. Near the most dangerous section, Adrienne received a text, quickly checking it before accelerating slightly. West saw her knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice remarkably steady. "Perfect," she replied, approaching a sharp curve with a steep drop-off. No guardrail, just as her message had indicated. "I've been waiting for this." In one fluid motion, Adrienne jerked the wheel toward the cliff edge. West, anticipating something but not this exact moment, grabbed for the wheel, but the car was already careening toward the edge. "I'm sorry it came to this," Adrienne said with chilling calmness, releasing her seatbelt and reaching for the door handle as the car began to tip. West lunged across the console, grabbing her arm. "If I go, you go with me," he growled, fighting for control of the vehicle. The car smashed through underbrush, tires finding no purchase on the rocky slope. As they began to roll, West saw a flash of genuine fear in Adrienne's eyes before everything exploded into chaos. Shattering glass, screaming metal, and then darkness as the car tumbled down the mountainside. When emergency services arrived, they found Adrienne with minor injuries, sobbing hysterically about losing control on the curve. West was unconscious, bloody, and barely breathing in the crushed passenger side. As paramedics worked frantically to stabilize him, no one noticed Adrienne's brief, satisfied glance at her husband's broken body before her tears resumed. Chapter 3. The Fall. Garrett Reeves stood by West's hospital bed, his military posture rigid with contained rage. 6 days had passed since the accident, and West remained in a deep coma, his body brutalized by the crash. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and severe head trauma had required emergency surgeries, with doctors offering guarded prognosis at best. Adrian had performed the role of devastated wife flawlessly for the first 48 hours. Tearful bedside vigils, consulting with specialists, coordinating with insurance. But by day 3, her visits shortened dramatically, always coinciding with doctor rounds or nursing shift changes for maximum visibility. Today she hadn't appeared at all, leaving Garrett alone with the rhythmic beeping of machines, keeping his friend alive. He watched West's bruised, swollen face, remembering the secure file link West had sent just 3 days before the crash with the cryptic message: "Insurance, in case my mountain trip takes an unexpected turn." When Garrett accessed the files and saw the evidence West had gathered, his military training immediately kicked in: threat assessment, resource evaluation, strategic planning. He'd been documenting Adrienne's movements since the accident, noting her increasingly frequent meetings with Dom Vega and their poor attempts at discretion. The hospital room door opened, and Adrienne entered, startling slightly at Garrett's presence. "You're still here," she observed, arranging flowers she'd brought before perfunctorily touching West's unresponsive hand. "Always will be," Garrett replied, watching her closely. "Interesting how your grief never seems to smudge your makeup." Her eyes flashed dangerously. "Everyone processes trauma differently. I don't need your judgment on top of possibly losing my husband." Possibly. Garrett noted the word choice. Adrienne's phone chimed, and she checked it automatically. Whatever she read changed her demeanor instantly. "I need to handle some insurance paperwork," she said, already moving toward the door. "The medical bills are mounting quickly." After she left, Garrett placed a small recording device beneath West's bed, another behind the wall-mounted television. Phase 1 of his counteroffensive was beginning. 2 days later, West's parents arrived from Pittsburgh, devastated by their son's condition. Frank Blackwood's weathered face seemed to age years as he stood vigil by West's bed, while Eleanor alternated between tearful prayer and fierce determination to see him recover. "The doctors are suggesting we prepare for the worst," Eleanor told Garrett quietly in the hallway. "But I know my son. He's always been a fighter." "That he has," Garrett agreed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "And he's not fighting alone." Within days, Garrett witnessed the first truly reprehensible move. Adrienne brought paperwork for Frank and Eleanor to sign, an authorization to sell Wes half of their engineering firm to cover mounting medical expenses. His partner already agreed. Adrienne explained smoothly. "It's just a formality, since I have power of attorney." Frank hesitated, pen hovering over the document. "Shouldn't we wait?" Wes would want input on selling his life's work. Adrienne's sympathetic expression never reached her eyes. "The doctors have been clear about his chances, Frank. We need to be practical. The firm will lose value if we wait until after." "After what?" Eleanor demanded, her small frame straightening with maternal fury. "After my son dies? Is that what you're counting on?" "Of course not," Adrienne backtracked. "I just meant." "I know exactly what you meant," Eleanor snapped, snatching the papers. "We'll have our lawyer review these first." Adrienne's mask slipped momentarily, revealing irritation before she composed herself. "Of course. Take your time." Her tone suggested the opposite. The confrontation in the hospital room was only the beginning. Within weeks, Adrienne had listed their home for sale, claiming the memories would be too painful. She transferred funds from joint accounts into new ones solely in her name. West's vintage car collection, 3 classic American muscle cars he'd painstakingly restored, disappeared from their garage, reportedly sold to cover expenses. During a heated argument about these actions, Garrett's hidden devices captured Adrienne's most damning statement yet. When Eleanor questioned the necessity of selling their family home so quickly, Adrienne finally snapped. "He'll never wake up anyway," she shouted, frustration breaking through her carefully constructed facade. "The neurologists give him less than 5% chance of regaining consciousness. I'm trying to salvage what life I can from this tragedy." Eleanor's response was quiet but severe. "The only tragedy here is that my son ever trusted you." That evening, Garrett found Adrienne and Dom in the hospital parking garage, speaking in hushed tones. "His parents are becoming a problem," Adrienne was saying. "They're blocking the property transfers. Dom touched her cheek in a possessive gesture. They're elderly and upset. They'll exhaust themselves eventually. His smile was predatory. We just need patience. Everything's proceeding as planned. Is it? She hissed. We're 3 months in, and he's still breathing. The doctors said the trauma should have been fatal. Perhaps we should consider helping nature along, Dom suggested quietly. Adrian hesitated only briefly. Let me think about our options. Garrett captured the entire exchange on video, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. The next day, he contacted an old military connection, Special Agent Vivian Holt, FBI Financial Crimes Division, a sharp-minded woman with an impressive conviction record. This goes beyond my usual cases, Holt noted after reviewing the preliminary evidence in a secure meeting room at the local FBI field office. But the interstate nature of the financial fraud, combined with the attempted murder angle, puts it in federal jurisdiction. How much more do you need? Garrett asked. Holt's expression was measured. Concrete evidence linking them both to the crash attempt. And we need to follow the money trail completely. These cases are won on paper trails, not just recorded conversations. I can get you inside their new apartment, Garrett offered. Security system schematics, entry protocols. Holt raised an eyebrow. I didn't hear that, and you absolutely should not conduct illegal surveillance. After a pause, she added more quietly, but hypothetically, documentation of their financial planning would be extremely valuable. While this investigation progressed, West remained trapped in darkness. His consciousness floated in a strange limbo, sometimes aware of conversations around him, other times lost in dreamlike memories. He heard his parents' voices, felt their touches, sensed Garrett's steady presence. And occasionally, he perceived Adrienne's briefer visits, her perfume triggering waves of betrayal, even in his semi-conscious state. In his moments of greater awareness, West focused all his mental energy on one goal: recovery. Each neural pathway, each synapse, became a battleground where he fought to reconnect his mind to his body. The doctors noted unusual brain activity, but remained pessimistic about his prospects for meaningful recovery. Then, exactly 5 months after the crash, West's index finger moved in response to his mother's voice. Just a slight twitch, but unmistakable. 3 days later, he squeezed her hand weakly. A week after that, his eyelids fluttered. The medical team was stunned by the rapid progression once it began. Garrett immediately implemented security protocols, ensuring that knowledge of West's improvement remained strictly contained to his parents, 2 trusted nurses, and West's primary doctor, who agreed to medical confidentiality based on concerns about the suspicious circumstances of the accident. By month 6, West could open his eyes and track movement, though he couldn't yet speak. His first fully coherent communication came through a letterboard, laboriously spelling out 2 words to Garrett: tell everything. Garrett spent hours bringing West up to speed on Adrian and Dom's activities. The home sold for significantly below market value to a corporate entity they controlled. West's power of attorney used to liquidate most of his assets, the engineering firm now being systematically dismantled for parts. West's response was simple: not done yet. His recovery accelerated with his renewed purpose. Physical therapy sessions became crucibles of determination as he pushed his broken body toward functionality. Speech therapy, cognitive exercises, every aspect of his rehabilitation was approached with military discipline. When pain threatened to overwhelm him, West focused on the digital evidence Garrett showed him. Adrian and Dom planning their future with his money, laughing about his condition, discussing how much longer to maintain the pretense before moving West to start fresh. On day 187, West stood unassisted for the first time, gripping his walker with white knuckles but refusing support. On day 201, he took his first independent steps. By day 225, he could speak in full sentences, his voice rougher but gaining strength. Through it all, Adrian remained unaware, believing the doctor's initial reports of minimal brain activity. During this period, Agent Holt built a comprehensive federal case, meticulously documenting the financial crimes spanning multiple states. The attempted murder charge would be more challenging to prove, without West's testimony, but the financial fraud alone carried substantial prison sentences. On day 233, while reviewing surveillance footage from Adrian and Dom's apartment, they discovered the final piece of the puzzle, documentation of their planning before the crash, including brake line tampering instructions, the selected mountain route, and a timeline for liquidating West's assets after his unfortunate passing. When Garrett shared this discovery, West spoke clearly and coldly from his hospital bed. "It's time they learn I'm awake." The plan was set in motion. Holt positioned her agents strategically, documentation was finalized, and a date was selected. Date 240 post-accident, the day Adrian and Dom planned to finalize the sale of West's last major asset, his company's revolutionary earthquake-resistant foundation patents. West, now able to move with only a slight limp, returned to his regular hospital room, appearing comatose when necessary. The trap was set. On the designated morning, Adrian received an urgent call from West's doctor requesting an immediate meeting regarding a significant development. Dom insisted on accompanying her, concerned about potential complications to their plans. As they approached West's room, neither noticed the plainclothes agents positioned throughout the corridor. When they entered, they found what appeared to be the usual scene: West unresponsive in bed, monitoring equipment beeping steadily. "Dr. Morris called us urgently," Adrian said to the nurse checking West's vitals. "Something about a development?" "The doctor will be here shortly," the nurse replied, finishing her checks and exiting. Once alone, Dom approached the bed, studying West's seemingly unconscious form. "He doesn't look any different. Still a vegetable." "Don't be crude," Adrian chided, checking her watch impatiently. "We need to be at the attorney's office by 11. "Somewhere important to be," a familiar voice asked from the doorway. Adrian whirled to find Agent Holt entering, flanked by two more agents. "Who are you?" Dom demanded, instinctively stepping away from West's bed. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Holt replied calmly, displaying her credentials. "We have some questions about financial transactions related to Mr. Blackwood's assets." Adrian immediately adopted her grieving wife persona. "This is hardly the time or place. My husband is awake," West interrupted, opening his eyes and slowly sitting up in the hospital bed. The blood drained from Adrienne's face as she staggered back against the wall. Dom froze in shock, unable to process the sight of the man they believed would never regain consciousness. "Hello, Adrian," West said, his voice steady. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Chapter 4. Rising from Ashes. The tableau in the hospital room remained frozen for several heartbeats. West sitting upright in his bed, Adrian pressed against the wall in shock, Dom standing rigid with disbelief, and Agent Holt watching the scene with professional detachment. Garrett entered silently from the adjoining bathroom, positioning himself between the couple and the door. "This is impossible," Adrian finally whispered, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she pointed at West. The doctor said what you wanted to hear," West replied calmly. "What you needed to hear to proceed with your plans." Dom recovered more quickly, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. "Whatever you think you know, we know everything," Agent Holt interrupted, her tone matter of fact. "The financial fraud across state lines, the unauthorized transfers, the shell companies." She paused deliberately. "The brake tampering, that's absurd," Dom scoffed, though his complexion had grown ashen. "This is clearly some sort of setup." West's laugh held no humor. "Setup? That's rich coming from a man who helped plan my tragic accident. Tell me, was it your idea to use the mountain route, or did Adrian suggest it?" Adrienne's shock was transforming into desperate calculation. She moved toward West, tears suddenly streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an award. "West, darling, you're confused. The head trauma." "Don't," West cut her off, his voice like steel. "I heard you, Adrian. During the coma, I heard you tell my parents I would never wake up. I heard you and Dom discussing how to help nature along if I survive too long." Agent Holt stepped forward, removing handcuffs from her jacket. "Adrian Blackwood, Dominic Vega, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder." As the agents began reading their rights, Dom made a desperate lunge toward the door, shoving Garrett aside. He managed 3 steps into the hallway before being tackled by waiting FBI personnel. Adrian remained frozen, staring at West with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You've ruined everything," she hissed as an agent secured her wrists behind her back. West held her gaze steadily. "No, Adrian, you did that yourself." As they were led away, Adrian looked back once. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have you been awake?" West's expression remained impassive. "Long enough." After they disappeared down the corridor, West exhaled deeply, his body sagging with the release of tension. His parents entered immediately, Eleanor rushing to embrace her son while Frank stood at the foot of the bed, emotion etched into the lines of his weathered face. "You did it, son," Frank said, voice rough with pride. West closed his eyes briefly. Phase 1 is complete. But this is just the beginning. The media frenzy was immediate and voracious. The story had everything: attempted murder, betrayal, a miraculous recovery, and the dramatic arrest. West's attorney issued a brief statement confirming the arrests and requesting privacy, but the damage to Adrian and Dom's carefully constructed facades was total and irreparable. Within days, evidence of their financial crimes mounted as FBI forensic accountants traced the complex web of transactions designed to strip West of everything he'd built. The millions they diverted, the properties transferred through shell companies, the planned dismantling of his engineering firm, all documented in meticulous detail. Despite the overwhelming evidence, both Adrian and Dom made bail, their attorneys already constructing defenses claiming miscommunication and business disputes rather than criminal intent. The attempted murder charge would be more difficult to prove, they argued, without direct evidence of tampering with the vehicle. West, now officially discharged from the hospital, moved into Garrett's modest home to continue his recovery and rehabilitation. His own home was gone, sold to a corporate entity controlled by Dom's cousin. His office had been cleared out, patents in legal limbo, and bank accounts drained. "We'll recover everything," Garrett assured him during a particularly difficult physical therapy session. Holt's team is building an airtight case. West pushed through the pain of rehabilitating his damaged leg muscles. "The legal system isn't enough. They deserve more than prison time." "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, recognizing the dangerous gleam in his friend's eyes. "Justice is about restoration," West replied, forcing his leg to complete another repetition. "I want everything back, and I want them to experience exactly what they try to do to me." Over the following weeks, West focused on 3 parallel tracks: his physical recovery, assisting the FBI's case, and his own private investigation into Adrian and Dom's vulnerabilities. He discovered Dom's gambling debts to offshore entities, Adrienne's estrangement from her wealthy family due to previous ethical breaches, and the precarious foundation of their new development company built entirely on West's stolen resources. During this period, West underwent a physical transformation. His once robust frame, diminished by months of hospitalization, began regaining muscle through relentless training. He grew a beard, adopted wire-rimmed glasses, and cut his formerly conservative hairstyle into something more modern and distinctive. The changes, combined with his significant weight loss, created a person that even close acquaintances might not immediately recognize. 6 weeks after the arrests, West was ready to implement his own plan, one that ran parallel to, but separate from, the federal case. Using funds his parents had secured before Adrian could access them, West created a new identity: Lucas Reynolds, a venture capitalist from Seattle interested in distressed real estate opportunities. "This goes beyond what the law can do," Agent Holt warned when she discovered West's intentions during a case preparation meeting. "You could jeopardize our prosecution." "I'm not breaking any laws," West countered. "I'm simply introducing myself to the business community as an investor. If I happen to cross paths with the people who try to kill me, that's coincidence." Holt's expression showed she didn't believe this for a second. "The evidence we have is strong, but not bulletproof. Their attorneys are already claiming the financial transfers were authorized by you before the accident." "Then we need more evidence," West said simply. Direct confessions. Unambiguous proof. Obtained legally, Holt emphasized. West smiled without humor. Of course. His first encounter with Adrian and Dom in his new persona came at a real estate development conference. Lucas Reynolds approached their booth, expressing interest in their struggling riverfront project, the development being built with West's stolen capital. Neither recognized him. West's physical transformation, combined with their certainty that he remained severely impaired, created a perfect disguise. Dom was immediately attentive to the potential investor, while Adrian employed her practiced charm. We should discuss this over dinner, she suggested, touching Lucas/West's arm lightly. Some details are better addressed in a more private setting. The dinner meeting revealed the fractures in their partnership. Dom dominated the conversation, frequently contradicting Adrian and minimizing her role. She, in turn, undermined him subtly when discussing financial projections. Their united front was crumbling under the pressure of pending charges and failing ventures. West played his role perfectly, expressing interest but demanding more detailed financials before committing. I've been burned before, he explained. Trust requires transparency. Over the next month, Lucas became a fixture in their business dealings, dangling the promise of a major investment while gathering information about their operations and internal communications. He placed listening devices in their office during a private tour, gained access to their electronic communications by offering use of his secure server for sensitive documents, and systematically mapped their remaining assets and vulnerabilities. The intelligence gathered provided a clear picture. Adrian and Dom were desperate. Legal fees were mounting, investors were fleeing, and their stolen capital was dwindling rapidly. More importantly, they were turning on each other, each blaming the other for their collapsing plans. During this period, West also discovered that Adrian had been pressuring his elderly parents to sell their modest farm in Pennsylvania, land that happened to sit atop valuable natural gas deposits. She'd used her power of attorney during his coma to place a lien against the property for medical expenses, creating financial distress for Frank and Eleanor. This final betrayal crystallized West's resolve. The plan he formulated was elegant in its simplicity. He would offer Adrian and Dom exactly what they wanted: escape, while ensuring they implicated themselves completely in the process. Through Lucas Reynolds, West approached them with an opportunity: a major development project in Mexico with powerful investors seeking American partners. The catch? They would need to move quickly and transfer their remaining assets offshore before the FBI froze everything. My contacts can create a completely new identity for each of you, West explained over drinks in their penthouse apartment, the apartment purchased with the proceeds from selling his home. But they require proof that you can handle complicated situations. What kind of proof? Dom asked, his desperation evident despite his attempt at casual interest. You're facing serious charges, West replied. My associates need assurance you've handled similar situations successfully before. The trap was set. After exchanging meaningful glances, Adrian made the first move toward confession. Perhaps we should tell Mr. Reynolds about our previous creative problem solving, she suggested to Dom, to establish trust. Over the next 2 hours, fueled by expensive scotch and desperation, Adrian and Dom revealed the entire conspiracy. From their first meeting at a development conference 18 months earlier, through their affair, to the carefully orchestrated attempt on West's life. Every word was captured by the recording device in West's watch, transmitting live to Garrett and Agent Holt at an FBI monitoring post. The mountain road was the perfect spot, Adrian explained, her voice clinically detached as she described planning her husband's murder. No guardrails, sharp turn, steep drop-off. It would look like a tragic accident, distracted driving, or brake failure. Dom added with disturbing pride. The tampering was untraceable. I have a connection who showed me how to damage the line, so it would fail gradually under pressure. By the time they investigated, the evidence would be destroyed in the crash. What went wrong? West asked, maintaining his composure through sheer willpower. Adrienne's face darkened. He wouldn't die. The car rolled instead of plunging straight down. The passenger compartment remained partially intact. She took another drink. Then the coma. The doctor said he'd never recover, but still, it complicated things. Having to play grieving wife while he lingered was challenging, she continued, oblivious to the white-knuckled grip Lucas now had on his glass. We had to accelerate our timeline, liquidate assets before questions arose. And now this investment opportunity could solve everything, Dom concluded, raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings. Again, West matched their toast, his eyes revealing nothing of the fury and vindication churning inside him. To getting exactly what you deserve. The next morning, FBI agents arrested Adrian and Dom based on their recorded confessions, charging them with additional counts that made bail impossible. As they were led from their apartment in handcuffs, West stepped from the shadow of an unmarked FBI vehicle, now dressed in his own clothes, beard shaved, glasses gone. Recognition dawned in Adrienne's eyes as she was guided toward the waiting transport. You, she gasped. Lucas was awake, West replied simply. Completely awake. Chapter 5. Reclamation. The federal case progressed swiftly following the arrests. With their explicit confessions and a mountain of financial evidence, prosecutors filed over 30 separate charges against Adrian and Dom spanning wire fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and racketeering. If convicted on all counts, they faced potential sentences exceeding 50 years. Despite this legal momentum, West faced the daunting task of rebuilding his shattered life. The criminal prosecution wouldn't automatically restore his stolen assets, many of which had been transferred through multiple shell companies or sold to third parties. Civil recovery would require separate legal battles, potentially stretching for years. 3 months after the arrests, West sat in his attorney's office reviewing the damage assessment. Malcolm Kwan, a razor-sharp litigator specializing in complex financial recovery, laid out the stark reality. The good news is we've frozen what remains of their assets, Malcolm explained, gesturing to financial statements spread across his desk. The bad news is they've burned through almost 70% of what they took from you. West studied the documents with a clinical detachment that belied his inner turmoil. His home, of 15 years, sold to Dom's cousin for 60 cents on the dollar. His classic car collection, dispersed to private buyers across 3 states. His company's patents, leveraged against high-interest loans to fund Adrian and Dom's lifestyle. What's our strategy? West asked, his voice steady. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. 2-pronged approach. Criminal restitution through the federal case, which is substantial but limited to what they still have or can be directly traced. Meanwhile, we file civil suits against every entity that received your property through fraudulent transfers. Timeline. Years, Malcolm admitted, even with the criminal convictions supporting our claims. West nodded, having expected this answer. Then we need a 3rd prong. The attorney raised an eyebrow. Which is? Direct negotiation, West replied, with leverage. That evening, West visited Adrian at the detention center where she awaited trial. She entered the visitor's room with practiced dignity despite her prison jumpsuit, her hair still expertly styled, somehow maintaining an illusion of control even in captivity. Her eyes widened slightly, seeing West. The first time they'd been face-to-face since her arrest. She sat opposite him at the small table, composing her features into a neutral expression. I'm surprised you came, she said coolly. I wanted to see you in here, West replied honestly. It helps. Adrienne's mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of genuine emotion. Not remorse, but frustrated rage. Enjoying your revenge tour? I hope it's satisfying. It's just beginning, West said. I'm here to offer you a choice. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of choice? The prosecutors are seeking maximum sentences. Based on your age, you'll likely die in prison. My attorneys won't save you, West interrupted. Not with the recorded confessions, financial paper trail, and my testimony. Adrian leaned forward slightly. What's your point? I can recommend leniency to the prosecutors. Perhaps reduce your sentence to 10 years instead of 50. Her laugh was brittle. Out of the goodness of your heart. After all this, In exchange for your cooperation in recovering my assets, West clarified. Sign the transfer documents my attorney has prepared, provide authentication for all offshore accounts, and publicly admit your guilt. Adrian studied him, calculating as always. And if I refuse? Then I ensure the prosecutors seek every possible enhancement. You get nothing. You're not as clever as you think, West, she replied coldly. I've already transferred everything of value to places you'll never reach. Whatever recovery you're planning is a fraction of what you lost. West stood to leave. That's where you're wrong, Adrian. I've already begun taking back what's mine. The development company, for instance. He savored the flicker of surprise on her face. Your investors were quite receptive when Lucas Reynolds revealed his true identity and offered to rescue their failing projects. That's impossible. The Riverfront project breaks ground next month under my company's management. Your former partners were surprisingly eager to distance themselves from accused murderers. Adrienne's composure cracked further. You're bluffing. Consider my offer, West concluded, turning to leave. You have 48 hours. After that, I stop being generous. As he walked away, Adrian called after him. It wasn't all a lie, you know. I did love you once. West paused, but didn't turn around. That's the difference between us, Adrian. I never stopped loving you. I just finally saw you clearly. While the legal proceedings advanced, West implemented his multi-layered recovery plan. Beyond the criminal and civil cases, he leveraged his unique position to directly approach the individuals and companies that had acquired his assets through Adrian and Dom's scheme. To the cousin who purchased his home at a fraction of its value, West presented two options: return the property for the purchase price plus reasonable improvements, or face a prolonged legal battle with immediate freezing of the asset. After consulting his attorney, the cousin chose the former. For the development projects initiated with stolen capital, West offered the investors a partnership rather than litigation, demonstrating how his engineering expertise could salvage their investments while gradually returning control to him. Most accepted, recognizing their precarious legal position and the practicality of his proposal. The recovery of his company's patents proved most challenging. Dom had used them as collateral for loans from Archer Financial Group, a private equity firm with a reputation for aggressive litigation. When conventional negotiations failed, West discovered their CEO had a personal interest in earthquake-resistant construction due to a vacation home in a seismic zone. West approached him directly with an innovative application of his technology specifically suited to the CEO's property, offered as part of a settlement. Smart move, Agent Holt commented when West explained this approach during a trial preparation meeting. Though I'm still concerned about your direct involvement with witnesses. Everything's above board, West assured her. I'm simply reclaiming what's mine through negotiation rather than courts. And what about Dom's continued silence? She pressed. Adrienne's at least talking plea deals, but he's refusing to cooperate. West's expression hardened. He'll break. He doesn't have Adrienne's discipline. The catalyst came from an unexpected source. During pretrial discovery, prosecutors uncovered evidence that Dom had secretly recorded conversations with Adrian discussing contingency plans that excluded him, essentially setting him up as the primary culprit if their scheme collapsed. When confronted with these recordings, Dom's loyalty evaporated. He offered comprehensive testimony against Adrian in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing details that even the FBI's thorough investigation had missed, including the location of additional offshore accounts containing nearly $2 million of West's money. With both defendants now cooperating and providing evidence against each other, the prosecution's case became virtually unassailable. Rather than risk trial, Adrian accepted a plea agreement for 20 years with possibility of parole after 12, while Dom received 16 years with potential parole after 8. On the day of sentencing, West sat in the courtroom surrounded by supporters, his parents, Garrett, Agent Holt, and several colleagues from his recovering business. When given opportunity to address the court, he spoke briefly but powerfully. These individuals didn't just attempt to take my life. They tried to erase everything I'd built, everything I valued. They betrayed not only me, but everyone who depended on me, employees, clients, family. Their actions remind us that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trust most completely. As Adrian was led away in handcuffs, she locked eyes with West one final time. In that moment, he saw something he never expected, a flicker of genuine remorse, quickly replaced by her practiced mask of indifference. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. West declined extensive comments, simply stating, "Today is about justice, not vengeance. Now I can focus on rebuilding." That rebuilding accelerated over the following months. West recovered approximately 60% of his financial assets through the combined criminal restitution, civil settlements, and direct negotiations. His home was restored to him, though he chose to sell it rather than live among memories of betrayal. His engineering firm, while diminished, secured several prestigious contracts that would eventually restore its industry position. Throughout this period, West maintained his rigorous physical rehabilitation, transforming his body from its post-coma weakness into something stronger than before. The physical discipline provided focus during the emotional turbulence of recovery, each milestone in strength matching a milestone in reclaiming his life. At Garrett's encouragement, West also began speaking to support groups for victims of intimate partner violence and financial exploitation, sharing his experience as both warning and inspiration. These sessions proved unexpectedly therapeutic, connecting him with others who understood the unique trauma of betrayal by those closest to them. 9 months after the sentencing, West visited his parents' farm in Pennsylvania, now secure from Adrienne's attempts to force its sale. As he helped his father repair the barn roof, Frank broached a subject they'd carefully avoided. "You've done remarkable things, son. Recovered almost everything." "Not everything," West acknowledged, driving a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. Frank paused his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "You haven't talked about what comes next." After the recovery, West continued working, avoiding his father's gaze. "There's still more to do." "There always will be," Frank said gently. "But at some point, you need to decide if you're living or just surviving." That evening, sitting on the farmhouse porch with his parents, West found himself describing a new architectural concept he'd been developing. Homes designed specifically for rehabilitation patients, incorporating innovative features to support recovery while maintaining aesthetic appeal. "I've been thinking about land near the rehabilitation center," he explained, animation entering his voice for the first time in months. "Creating a small community for people transitioning from hospital to independent living." Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance with Frank before asking, "When would you start?" West hesitated, then smiled slightly. "I already have preliminary drawings." As he unfurled the blueprints, explaining his vision with growing enthusiasm, West felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness or forgetting, but the first tentative steps toward a future defined by creation rather than recovery, by possibility rather than loss. Later that night, reviewing case updates from Malcolm, West discovered that Adrian had begun addiction counseling in prison, seemingly confronting the choices that had led to her downfall. The information triggered complex emotions, not sympathy exactly, but acknowledgement of the human tragedy underlying the criminal acts. He closed the file and instead opened his design software, losing himself in the work of creation until dawn broke over the farm. When Eleanor found him asleep at the table, surrounded by drawings and calculations, she covered him with a blanket without waking him, recognizing that her son was, finally, building something new. Chapter 6: Foundations. 14 months after Adrian and Dom began serving their sentences, West stood on a windswept plot of land overlooking Madrona Bay, watching as surveyors marked boundaries for what would become Restoration Point, his innovative residential community for rehabilitation patients. Beside him, Dr. Lillian Park, the neurologist who had overseen his recovery, reviewed the architectural renderings with professional interest. "The adaptive features are remarkable," she noted, scrolling through detailed plans on a tablet. "Particularly the transition elements that can be modified as patients regain function." West nodded, pointing toward the southern edge of the property. "Each residence will have 3 configuration stages: full support, partial assistance, and independent living. Patients won't need to relocate as they recover. Their homes evolve with them. Revolutionary, Dr. Park stated simply. How soon can you break ground? Final permits should arrive next week. Construction begins immediately after. As they discussed implementation details, West's phone buzzed with a notification from Malcolm Kwan. The message was brief but significant. Judge-approved final asset recovery. Offshore account transfers complete. Recovery phase officially concluded. West pocketed the phone without commenting, but felt a weight lift that he hadn't realized he still carried. The legal battles that had consumed much of his focus for nearly 2 years were finally complete. The financial recovery wasn't total. Some assets had been irretrievably lost in Adrian and Dom's spending spree, but it was substantial enough to fund both his rebuilt business and this new venture. Everything all right? Dr. Park asked, noting his momentary distraction. Perfect timing, actually, West replied. That was confirmation we're fully funded through completion. That evening, West hosted a small gathering at his new home, a modernist structure he'd designed himself on the opposite side of the city from his former residence. The guests included Garrett and his recent fiancée Monica, Agent Holt, now a personal friend, Dr. Park, and Malcolm Kwan, all of whom had played crucial roles in West's recovery journey. As they enjoyed dinner on the cantilevered deck overlooking Lake Union, the conversation remained deliberately focused on the future rather than the past. West described his vision for Restoration Point. Garrett announced plans to expand his security consulting business, and Monica shared updates on her refugee advocacy work. Later, after other guests had departed, Garrett and West sat alone by the outdoor fire pit, nursing glasses of bourbon. Malcolm's message today, West said after a comfortable silence. The recovery's officially complete. Garrett studied his friend carefully. And how does that feel? West considered the question seriously. Like closing a book I never wanted to read. Necessary, but not satisfying. You've accomplished something remarkable, you know. Most people would have been destroyed by what happened. West gazed into the flames. I almost was. But you weren't, Garrett countered firmly. You rebuilt, created something new, something better. West nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in his friend's words. Then, with deliberate casualness, he mentioned, I received another letter from Adrian last week. Garrett's expression tightened. And, same as the others. Apologies, explanations, requests for forgiveness. West's tone remained neutral, but his grip on the glass betrayed tension. Have you answered any of them? No. Garrett hesitated before asking. Do you think you ever will? West was silent for a long moment, watching the dancing flames. I don't know what I would say. You don't owe her anything, Garrett reminded him. Not responses, not forgiveness, nothing. I know, West agreed. But sometimes I wonder if I owe it to myself to find some kind of resolution. The conversation shifted to other topics, but the question lingered in West's mind long after Garrett departed. The letters from prison had started 6 months earlier. Initial messages filled with self-justification, gradually evolving into what seemed like genuine remorse. West had read each one, then filed them away without response, uncertain what closure would even look like after such profound betrayal. The following week, groundbreaking began at Restoration Point. As West watched the excavators prepare foundations for the first buildings, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This project represented everything he valued. Innovation in service of helping others recover from trauma, architectural solutions to human challenges, creating structures that fostered healing rather than confinement. That afternoon, he received an unexpected visit from Agent Holt, who arrived at the construction site unannounced. Impressive, she commented, surveying the activity. Though I'm not here about your building project. West's expression grew guarded. What's happened? Dominic Vega was attacked in prison yesterday, she explained without preamble. Seriously injured. He's in the prison infirmary under guard. Why tell me this? Holt studied him carefully. Because he claims you arranged it. West's surprise appeared genuine. That's absurd. I've had no contact with Dom since the trial. I know, Holt confirmed. We've checked. But he's insistent, claiming you have connections inside the prison. West shook his head in disbelief. The only person I know in that prison is my ex-wife. and she has every reason to want Dom's suffering. If anything, she's the one you should be questioning. She's been interviewed, Holt acknowledged. Claims complete ignorance, though her cellmate reports she seemed unsurprised by the news. West turned back to watch the construction. So why are you really here, Vivian? You know I had nothing to do with this. Holt sighed. 2 reasons. First, professional courtesy. You should know Dom's making accusations. Second, she hesitated. I'm concerned about you. Me? West looked genuinely puzzled. You've accomplished everything you set out to do. Recovered your assets, rebuilt your business, seen justice served. Yet you seem unsettled. West considered denying it, but recognized the futility. I thought completion would feel different. It rarely does. Holt replied with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed many such cases. Justice doesn't heal wounds. It just stops the bleeding. After Holt departed, West found himself contemplating her words while reviewing the next phase of construction plans. The foundations being poured today would determine the stability and integrity of everything built upon them. Similarly, the foundation of his recovery had been built on pursuing justice and reclamation. But what would he construct upon that foundation now? That evening, West retrieved the file containing Adrienne's letters, reading through them chronologically. The progression was notable, from defensive justifications to halting acknowledgments of responsibility, finally to expressions of what appeared to be genuine remorse. The most recent letter included a passage that resonated unexpectedly. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I need you to know that I understand now the magnitude of what I destroyed. Not just your trust or our marriage, but the future we might have had. The person I was then seems alien to me now, someone whose choices I cannot comprehend, even as I must accept responsibility for them. After considerable reflection, West did something he hadn't anticipated. He wrote back. His response was brief and carefully composed. Adrienne, I've received your letters. I don't have forgiveness to offer, but I acknowledge your efforts toward accountability. My life continues forward. I hope you find meaning in yours, even within its current constraints. West. He mailed it the following morning before he could reconsider, not as an act of reconciliation, but as a step toward the closure Holt had indirectly suggested he was seeking. 3 days later, West received unexpected news that would significantly impact his ongoing recovery. His medical insurance was attempting to deny coverage for his most recent reconstructive surgery, claiming it was cosmetic rather than medically necessary. The procedure had addressed facial scarring from the crash, reducing pain and restoring normal function to his jaw. The denial triggered immediate practical challenges. The $87,000 bill would now come due directly, but also reopened emotional wounds, reminding West of vulnerabilities he'd worked to overcome. Battling insurance bureaucracy while managing his expanding business and overseeing Restoration Point stretched his still-recovering capabilities. During this period, West's friendship with Dr. Park evolved beyond professional consultations into a tentative personal connection. Lillian, as she asked him to call her outside of medical settings, shared his passion for innovative design and his commitment to improving rehabilitation outcomes. Their collaboration on Restoration Point naturally extended into dinners discussing implementation details, which gradually shifted to broader conversations about their lives and experiences. At 52, Lillian was a decade older than West, divorced for 15 years with 2 adult children pursuing careers across the country. Her direct manner and emotional intelligence provided a refreshing counterpoint to West's occasionally too analytical approach to relationships. "You're overthinking the insurance appeal," she told him bluntly during dinner at her Craftsman bungalow. "This isn't a complex negotiation. It's a bureaucratic error. The surgical notes clearly establish medical necessity." West smiled ruefully. "I've spent so long fighting complicated battles that I sometimes miss the simple solutions." "Understandable," Lillian acknowledged, refilling their wine glasses. "But recovery isn't just about regaining what was lost. It's about adapting how you approach new challenges." Her insight proved correct. When West refocused his insurance appeal on the straightforward medical evidence rather than complex legal arguments, the denial was reversed within weeks. This period also brought renewed contact with his former colleagues and employees. As West's engineering firm regained industry standing, several key team members who had departed during Adrienne's dismantling of the company expressed interest in returning. These reunions proved surprisingly emotional, each representing another strand rewoven into the fabric of his professional identity. Construction at Restoration Point progressed rapidly, the innovative designs attracting attention from medical communities nationwide. 6 months into development, West received an invitation to present the concept at a major healthcare architecture conference in Chicago. The presentation was a professional triumph, generating interest from potential partners and investors. However, the true significance of the trip came afterwards, when West visited the rehabilitation center where he had spent weeks relearning basic functions after emerging from his coma. Walking through those hallways, now as a successful architect rather than a broken patient, provided a profound perspective shift. West realized how completely his identity had transformed since those darkest days. He was no longer defined by what had been done to him, but by what he had created from the aftermath. This realization catalyzed a decision he'd been contemplating for months. Upon returning home, West filed paperwork to legally change his name from Weston Blackwood to West Blackwood, formally adopting the shortened version he'd always used casually. The change was subtle but meaningful, representing both continuity with his past and a deliberate evolution beyond it. When asked by friends about the decision, West explained simply, Weston was married to Adrienne. West is building Restoration Point. As the first buildings at Restoration Point neared completion, West received another letter from prison, this one from Dom, not Adrienne. Unlike her missives of remorse, Dom's letter contained only accusations and threats, blaming West for his prison assault and promising retribution upon release. West turned the letter over to Holt without response, recognizing it as the desperate flailing of a man confronting the consequences of his own actions. Adrienne's next letter, arriving a week later, contained an unexpected disclosure. She had been providing information to prison authorities about Dom's ongoing criminal activities from behind bars, including his attempts to intimidate witnesses in other cases. Her cooperation had resulted in additional charges that would likely extend his sentence significantly. I don't expect this to matter to you, she wrote, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to prevent any further harm he might cause, to you or anyone else. West shared this information with Holt, who confirmed its accuracy. She's been surprisingly helpful, Holt acknowledged. The cynic in me sees calculation, cooperation for potential early parole, but her assistance appears genuine. This development coincided with a significant milestone at Restoration Point, the completion of the first residential unit. As West conducted the final inspection, accompanied by Lillian and the project manager, he experienced an unexpected surge of emotion seeing the theoretical concepts manifested in physical reality. Each adaptive feature, from the adjustable countertops to the seamlessly integrated support systems, represented his response to trauma. Where Adrienne and Dom had sought to destroy, he had created. Where they had betrayed, he had built something trustworthy. That evening, West hosted a small gathering at the completed unit, inviting the core team who had brought Restoration Point from concept to reality. As they celebrated with champagne in the innovative space, Garrett raised a toast to foundations strong enough to build a future on. The words resonated deeply with West as he looked around at what he'd created. Not just the physical structure, but the network of relationships and purpose he'd constructed from the wreckage of betrayal. Later, as guests departed, Lillian remained behind, helping West gather empty glasses. Their movements in the kitchen space had developed an easy synchronicity over months of collaboration. You seem different tonight, she observed. More present. West considered this. I think I finally understand something I've been struggling with. For the longest time, I've been rebuilding what was destroyed, my business, my finances, my physical health. But Restoration Point isn't about rebuilding. It's about creating something entirely new. Lillian nodded. From trauma to innovation. It's a powerful journey. Not one I would have chosen, West acknowledged. but I'm starting to appreciate where it's led. Their conversation continued on the terrace overlooking the bay, the evening stretching into comfortable dialogue about future phases of the project, potential applications of the adaptive design principles, and eventually more personal reflections on their individual paths to this moment. When Lillian finally prepared to leave, she paused at the door. The first patients arrive next month. Are you ready? Wes smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes fully for perhaps the first time since his awakening. I think I finally am. Chapter 7. Echoes and Aftershocks. On a crisp October morning, exactly 3 years after the crash that was meant to end his life, Wes stood on the central plaza of the completed Restoration Point campus, watching as the first residents moved into their adaptive homes. The moment represented both culmination and beginning, the realization of his vision and the start of its actual purpose. Morgan Chun, a 34-year-old former professional dancer recovering from a spinal injury, wheeled herself along the gently sloping path toward Unit 7, accompanied by her wife and their young daughter. West had designed this particular unit with feedback from Morgan during her rehabilitation, incorporating specific features to support her professional background while accommodating her current limitations. It's exactly as we discussed. Morgan marveled as she explored the space, testing the adjustable features. The dance studio space. I never thought I'd have something like this again. West observed quietly from the doorway, sensing the significance of the moment for her family. This was why he had created Restoration Point, not merely as his personal recovery project, but as a genuine solution for others navigating their own rebuilding processes. Similar scenes unfolded across the campus as 7 initial residents took possession of their new homes. Each unit, while sharing core adaptive principles, had been customized to address specific recovery needs, from traumatic brain injuries to combat wounds to stroke rehabilitation. That evening, West hosted a welcome reception in the community center, where residents and their families mingled with the design team, medical advisors, and key investors. The atmosphere was celebratory but purposeful, focused on the community's mission rather than its architectural achievements. Lillian Park, now officially the medical director for Restoration Point, joined West as he surveyed the gathering. Their professional collaboration had gradually evolved into a more personal relationship, characterized by mutual respect and deepening affection. "You've created something extraordinary," she observed, watching Morgan demonstrate to other residents how her kitchen counters could be adjusted as her standing tolerance improved. "We created it," Wes corrected gently. "Your insights shaped every medical aspect of the design." Lillian smiled, accepting the acknowledgement. True partnership, something neither of us expected to find at this stage of life. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Wes' phone buzzing with a notification. He checked it quickly, his expression shifting subtly. "Everything all right?" Lillian asked. "Just an update from Malcolm," Wes replied, returning the phone to his pocket. "Nothing urgent." Later that night, after the reception concluded, Wes sat alone in his office reviewing the message more carefully. Malcolm had forwarded a court notification. Adrian had a parole hearing scheduled in 3 months, having served 4 years of her 20-year sentence. Her eligibility for early consideration stemmed from a combination of factors: exemplary behavior, extensive cooperation with authorities on other cases, completion of multiple rehabilitation programs, and significant restitution payment from her personal assets discovered during the continued financial investigation. The notification included a standard invitation for the victim to provide a statement at the hearing, either in person or in writing. Wes stared at this portion of the document for a long time, uncertain how to respond. The milestone he'd celebrated today, the completion and opening of Restoration Point, had felt like the closing of a chapter, a final transition from recovery to new creation. The parole notification threatened to reopen wounds he'd worked diligently to heal. West was still contemplating this development the following afternoon when he received an unexpected visitor at his on-site office. Agent Vivian Holt, now promoted to supervisory status within the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, arrived unannounced, her expression serious. "This is a professional visit," she clarified after brief greetings. "There's a situation you need to be aware of." West led her to his private office, concern evident in his posture. Related to Adrienne's parole hearing, Holt raised an eyebrow. You've been notified already? My attorney forwarded the court documents yesterday, West confirmed. Is there a problem with the hearing? Not exactly, Holt replied, selecting her words carefully. It's about Dominic Vega. He's been continuing criminal activities from prison, primarily through an associate on the outside, his cousin Jeffrey Vega, the same one who briefly owned your former house. West leaned forward, immediately alert. What kind of activities? Initially, witness intimidation related to his own case. But recently, our intelligence suggests something more concerning. Holt met his gaze directly. We have credible information that he's arranged for someone to intercept Adrienne when she's released. He blames her cooperation for the additional charges he's facing. Intercept, West repeated flatly. You mean kill? Holt nodded grimly. That's our assessment, yes. Have you informed prison authorities? Adrienne's attorney. We've notified all appropriate parties and increased monitoring of Dom's communications. But Jeffrey has gone off-grid, which concerns us. He has a history of violence and a documented vendetta against both Adrienne and you. West processed this information, his architect's mind automatically constructing scenarios and contingencies. What do you need from me? Primarily, awareness. Increase your security protocols. Jeffrey may target you as well, either as a path to Adrienne or as a separate vengeance objective. After Holt departed, West contacted Garrett immediately, briefing him on the situation. Though he had no official position at Restoration Point, Garrett had overseen security design for the campus and maintained connections with a contracted security firm. I'll have additional personnel on rotation within the hour, Garrett promised. And I'll review resident security protocols to ensure no one else is put at risk by association with you. That evening, West faced a difficult conversation with Lillian, explaining both the parole notification and the potential threat from Jeffrey Vega. Her response was characteristically direct. So after everything, she might walk free while you potentially face danger from her former partner? The justice system works on its own principles, West replied. Adrienne's cooperation has been substantial, apparently. Lillian studied him carefully. How do you feel about her potential release? West considered the question seriously. Conflicted. The rational part of me recognizes her sentence was appropriate for her cooperation. But emotionally, he shook his head. I don't know. And the parole statement? Will you provide one? I haven't decided. Lillian covered his hand with hers. Whatever you choose, remember that your response affects your healing, not just her fate. Over the following weeks, West maintained heightened security while focusing on supporting Restoration Point's new residents. Watching their individual journeys, small victories, and inevitable setbacks provided powerful perspective on his own continuing recovery process. Morgan Shun, in particular, demonstrated remarkable resilience, progressing from her wheelchair to walking short distances with supportive braces. You seem particularly invested in her progress, Lillian observed after Morgan's monthly assessment showed significant improvement. Her determination reminds me of something I almost lost, West admitted. During the darkest periods of my recovery, I questioned whether the effort was worthwhile. Morgan never seems to have those doubts. Different traumas, different responses, Lillian noted. Her injury wasn't caused by betrayal. The observation resonated with West, highlighting how the psychological aspects of his experience had been in some ways more debilitating than the physical injuries. Trust, once shattered, proved more difficult to rebuild than broken bones or damaged tissue. This reflection influenced his decision regarding Adrienne's parole hearing. After considerable deliberation, West composed a written statement that neither opposed nor supported her release, instead focusing on the factual impact of her actions and his ongoing recovery process. The document was clinical rather than emotional, describing the financial, physical, and psychological consequences of the attempted murder without suggesting what the parole board should decide. His final paragraph read simply, I have rebuilt my life following these events and continue to move forward. Whatever the board determines regarding Adrienne Blackwood's parole, I am committed to focusing on my current projects and future goals rather than past traumas. 2 days after submitting this statement, West received alarming news. Jeffrey Vega had been spotted in the vicinity of Restoration Point, photographing the campus from various vantage points. The security team increased patrols immediately, and Garrett arranged for temporary protective details for West and other potential targets. The threat materialized sooner than anticipated. While returning from Supply Run to a local architectural salvage yard, West noticed a vehicle following his truck, a nondescript sedan maintaining consistent distance through multiple turns. Drawing on security protocols Garrett had established, West diverted to a predetermined safe location, a police station, rather than leading the tail to Restoration Point or his private residence. As he pulled into the station parking lot, the sedan accelerated suddenly, drawing alongside his truck. West glimpsed Jeffrey Vega in the driver's seat, expression twisted with hatred, before the man gestured threateningly and sped away. This encounter elevated the situation from theoretical to immediate danger. FBI surveillance confirmed Jeffrey had rented a small apartment near Restoration Point using a false identity, suggesting he planned sustained surveillance or possibly an attack. Agent Holt recommended West temporarily relocate, but he refused. "I won't be driven from my own creation by another Vega," he stated firmly. "Increase security, set whatever traps necessary, but I'm staying visible." Garrett argued strenuously against this approach. "This isn't about pride or standing ground, West. Jeffrey's unstable and has proven access to weapons." "Exactly why hiding won't solve the problem," West countered. "He'll simply wait me out or, worse, target someone close to me. Better to draw him out under controlled circumstances." The strategy was risky but ultimately effective. 3 days later, Jeffrey attempted to breach campus security during evening hours, scaling the perimeter fence near West's private residence. The intrusion triggered multiple alarms, and prepositioned security personnel intercepted him before he reached the building. Though armed with a handgun, Jeffrey surrendered when confronted by overwhelming force. His subsequent arrest on multiple charges, including criminal stalking and attempted assault, effectively neutralized the immediate threat. During interrogation, he confirmed Dom had orchestrated the plan from prison, providing detailed instructions and financial support through an elaborate communication network. This evidence resulted in Dom's transfer to a higher security facility and additional charges that would effectively ensure he serve his full sentence without possibility of early release. The conspiracy also impacted Adrienne's upcoming parole hearing, though not in the way West might have expected. 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing, West received a letter from Adrienne's attorney requesting a private meeting. Curious but cautious, West agreed to meet at Malcolm's office with both attorneys present. Lisa Nakamura, Adrienne's counsel, was forthright during the discussion. "My client has instructed me to withdraw her parole application," she explained. "She believes appearing before the board would unnecessarily re-traumatize Mr. Blackwood and potentially endanger him further through association with her case." West studied the attorney carefully. "This seems contrary to her self-interest. Adrienne has been working extensively with a trauma specialist these past 4 years," Nakamura replied. "Her perspective has evolved significantly. She specifically asked me to inform you that she will serve her full sentence, or at minimum 10 years, before seeking any form of early release." "And she expects what in return?" Malcolm asked skeptically. "Nothing," Nakamura stated simply. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a unilateral decision she's already implemented." The hearing has been canceled. After she departed, Malcolm turned to West with raised eyebrows. "Unexpected. Do you believe her?" West considered the question. The strategic move would be proceeding with the hearing. Withdrawing gains are nothing tangible. "Unless she's playing a longer game," Malcolm suggested. "Perhaps," West acknowledged. "Or perhaps she's actually changed. Either way, it offers a respite I wasn't anticipating." This development coincided with a significant milestone at Restoration Point, the completion of the second residential phase, doubling the community's capacity. The expanded campus now included specialized facilities for various therapy modalities and a research center studying adaptive architecture's impact on rehabilitation outcomes. At the dedication ceremony for the new buildings, West found himself reflecting on the contrasting trajectories represented by this moment. The community he'd built flourishing while the conspiracy that nearly killed him continued collapsing under its own weight. The irony wasn't lost on him that Restoration Point's success stemmed directly from the trauma Adrian and Dom had inflicted. Following the ceremony, Lillian joined West on the observation deck overlooking the campus, their relationship now openly acknowledged within the community. As they watched residents navigating the thoughtfully designed spaces, Lillian broached the subject they'd been avoiding. Adrian withdrawing her parole application. What does that mean for your closure process? West considered this carefully. I've been asking myself the same question. For years, I measured recovery through tangible metrics: physical healing, financial restoration, professional rebuilding. But the emotional aspects have been more elusive. And now, I think I've been waiting for some definitive moment of resolution that may never come, West admitted. Maybe genuine recovery isn't about perfect closure, but about building something meaningful despite the open questions. Lillian nodded thoughtfully. The residents here would certainly understand that perspective. Most will never return to their pre-injury states, but they're creating fulfilling lives within new parameters. The conversation marked a subtle but significant shift in West's approach to his ongoing recovery, from seeking complete resolution to embracing purposeful adaptation. This philosophy influenced his decision regarding a prestigious architectural award nomination he'd received for Restoration Point's innovative design. Rather than accepting personal recognition, West restructured the submission to credit the collaborative team, including rehabilitation specialists, former patients who had provided crucial feedback, and the construction crews who had implemented the challenging designs. This approach reflected his evolving understanding that true healing came through connection rather than individual achievement. As Restoration Point's first anniversary approached, West found himself reflecting on everything that had transpired since his awakening in the hospital room. The journey from victim to survivor to creator had transformed him in ways he was still discovering, reshaping his perspectives on justice, recovery, and purpose. On the evening before the anniversary celebration, West visited the site of the crash for the first time since the accident. The mountain road had been improved with guardrails, and few physical traces remained of the violent incident that had altered his life trajectory. Standing at the overlook, gazing down the steep slope where the car had tumbled, West experienced not the expected surge of traumatic memory, but a profound sense of distance, as though the events had happened to someone else or in another lifetime. The realization wasn't about forgetting or minimizing what had occurred, but about recognizing how completely he had evolved beyond that moment of intended destruction. As sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, West took a small metal container from his pocket, containing the wedding ring he had continued wearing during his coma, the symbol of vows Adrian had so thoroughly betrayed. After a moment's contemplation, he opened the container and let the ring fall into the canyon below, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a quiet acknowledgement that some attachments could finally be released. On the drive back to Restoration Point, West's phone rang with an unexpected caller. Agent Holt with news that would reshape his understanding once again. "There's been a development you should know about," she began without preamble. "Adrian has provided information leading to the discovery of additional offshore accounts controlled by Dom. Accounts containing assets that we believe originated from your stolen funds." West pulled to the roadside, giving the conversation his full attention. "How much?" "Preliminary examination suggests approximately $1.2 million, Holt replied. She apparently discovered their existence recently through an old associate and immediately reported them. "Why would she do that?" West asked, genuinely puzzled. "She's already withdrawn her parole application. According to her statement, she doesn't believe she has the right to benefit from your funds, even indirectly through reduced restitution requirements." Holt paused before adding, "For what it's worth, my professional assessment is that her cooperation appears genuine rather than tactical." After concluding the call, West remained parked at the roadside turnout, processing this latest development. Throughout his recovery, he had maintained a relatively straightforward narrative. Adrian as calculated predator, himself as determined survivor. The possibility that she was experiencing genuine remorse and transformation complicated that narrative in ways he hadn't anticipated. As he finally continued toward Restoration Point, West realized that accepting this complexity represented its own form of growth, moving beyond the binary thinking of trauma to recognize that even the most damaged relationships contain multidimensional truths. The anniversary celebration the following day brought together residents, staff, medical partners, and supporters to commemorate Restoration Point's first year of operation. The event featured presentations highlighting resident achievements, research findings on adaptive architecture's effectiveness, and plans for future expansion. During his remarks, West spoke not about his personal journey, but about the collective wisdom he'd gained from the community's experiences. Restoration isn't about returning to what was, he observed, looking across the gathered faces. It's about creating what can be. Each of you has taught me that recovery isn't a destination, but a continuing process of adaptation, innovation, and growth. As applause rippled through the audience, West felt a sense of completion different from what he had originally sought. Not the neat closure of justice served or assets recovered, but the deeper satisfaction of purpose discovered through adversity. Adrian and Dom had tried to destroy his life, but in surviving their betrayal, he had discovered a more meaningful version of living than he might otherwise have found. Later that evening, as residents and guests continued celebrating, Lillian found West sitting quietly on a bench overlooking the illuminated campus. "You seem contemplative," she observed, joining him. "Having second thoughts about all this?" West smiled, taking her hand. "The opposite. I'm thinking about possibility." "In what sense?" "For years, I've defined myself in relation to what happened. The man who survived betrayal, who rebuilt after destruction. It was necessary, but limiting." Lillian nodded, understanding. "And now I'm ready to be defined by what comes next, whatever that may be." As they sat together watching the community they'd helped create, West felt the final pieces of his recovery falling into place. Not through forgetting the past, but through choosing to orient himself toward the future. Adrian and Dom had tried to write his ending, but he had claimed the authorship of his own story, creating chapters they could never have imagined. The lights of Restoration Point glowed against the darkness, a physical manifestation of the principle that had ultimately guided him through his darkest moments. That from destruction, with sufficient courage and vision, one could build something even stronger than what was lost. Chapter 8. Reconciliation. Spring arrived at Restoration Point with characteristic Pacific Northwest ambivalence. Brilliant sunshine interspersed with cleansing rains, mirroring the complex emotional landscape West had been navigating. 18 months after the community's opening, the campus had expanded to accommodate 24 residents at various stages of recovery, with a growing waiting list testifying to the concept's success. On this particular morning, West stood in the community greenhouse, assisting Morgan Shun with the adaptive gardening program she had developed for fellow residents. Her recovery had progressed remarkably. Now walking with minimal assistance, she had transformed from patient to program leader, embodying Restoration Point's philosophy of empowered healing. "The raised beds are working well," Morgan noted, demonstrating how residents with mobility limitations could tend plants without strain. "But I'm thinking about vertical systems for those with more significant restrictions." West immediately visualized possibilities. "We could integrate hydroponic columns with adjustable heights. Let me sketch some concepts." Their collaborative planning was interrupted by West's assistant, Sophia, with an unusual message. "There's a Frank Reynolds here to see you. Says he's an old associate from your engineering firm. He doesn't have an appointment, but insists it's important." West frowned slightly. The name was unfamiliar, and he generally knew all former colleagues. "Where is he now?" "Main reception. I can tell him you're unavailable if you prefer." "No, I'll meet him. Please show him to my office in 10 minutes." After finishing with Morgan, West returned to his office, curious about the unscheduled visitor. The man waiting there bore no resemblance to anyone from his professional past. Mid-30s, military bearing, with a hyper-aware posture of someone accustomed to assessing threats. "Mr. Reynolds?" West extended his hand cautiously. "That's my cover name," the visitor replied, his handshake firm but brief. "My actual identity isn't relevant. I'm here representing the Federal Witness Security Program." West's wariness increased immediately. Why would Witness Protection contact me? The man produced credentials confirming his affiliation. "I'm authorized to deliver information regarding Adrian Blackwood. May I speak freely, or would you prefer to verify my identity first?" "Say what you came to say," West replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite his internal alarm. 3 days ago, there was an attempt on Adrian Blackwood's life within the correctional facility. A fellow inmate attacked her with an improvised weapon. The man paused, gauging West's reaction. The attempt failed, but investigation revealed it was orchestrated by Dominic Vega through the same network he used to direct his cousin Jeffrey. West absorbed this information, his expression hardening. "Is she all right?" "Minor injuries." However, the incident represents the third such attempt in recent months. Previous incidents were classified as random violence, but this pattern suggests coordinated efforts. "Why tell me this?" West asked, though he suspected the answer. "Ms. Blackwood has provided crucial testimony in multiple federal cases beyond your own. Her continued cooperation depends on her survival." The man leaned forward slightly. "The Bureau is offering her placement in witness protection upon release. This would include a new identity, relocation, and permanent severance of all former connections." West's mind worked quickly, processing implications. "Including any connection to me or my case." "Correct, which is why I'm here." The man produced an envelope. "Ms. Blackwood requested that you receive this communication before she potentially disappears permanently. She wanted you to have the choice of whether to read it." West accepted the envelope, noting the prison security markings and validation stamps. "Is there anything else?" "Just this. If you wish to respond, you have 48 hours. After that, preparations for her protection program begin, and no further communication will be possible." The man stood to leave. "A secure number for your response is included in the envelope. I'll see myself out." After the visitor departed, West sat for several minutes without opening the envelope, contemplating its significance. The prospect of Adrian vanishing permanently, becoming someone new, somewhere unconnected to their shared past, represented both potential closure and lingering questions. Eventually, he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several handwritten pages, the familiar handwriting sending an unexpected jolt through him despite the years and distance. "West, if you're reading this, you've been informed of recent events and what they necessitate. Before I potentially disappear forever, I wanted to offer you something I believe you deserve: complete truth without manipulation or self-serving omissions." The story began long before you suspect. Dom and I first met when I was 24, a brief, intense relationship while you and I were briefly separated during graduate school. I never mentioned him because the relationship ended badly, with Dom becoming possessive and threatening. When he reappeared in my life 3 years ago at that development conference, I was shocked but also intrigued by his apparent transformation into a successful businessman. The affair didn't begin immediately. For months, it was strictly professional collaboration. I genuinely intended to maintain our marriage while advancing my career through his connections. The betrayal evolved gradually. First emotional, then physical, finally conspiratorial. I want you to understand that the decision to harm you wasn't made in a single moment. It developed through incremental compromises, each making the next easier. Dom knew exactly how to manipulate my ambition and resentments, particularly regarding our fertility struggles. He convinced me that you were the obstacle to everything I wanted: success, freedom, fulfillment. These aren't excuses. I made every choice consciously. But perhaps understanding the progression might provide some context for how someone who once truly loved you became capable of such betrayal. The mountain road wasn't spontaneous opportunity. We selected it months earlier during a weekend when you were at a conference. Dom and I drove the route repeatedly, identifying the precise curve, calculating timing and approach. The planning was methodical and extensive, which makes the moral failure even more indefensible. What I didn't anticipate was my own reaction after the crash. Seeing you broken and unconscious, the reality versus the abstract planning, triggered something unexpected. Not immediate remorse that came later, but a profound dissociation. I became two people, the grieving wife performing for others and the calculating conspirator continuing our plan. This division allowed me to proceed with liquidating our life while maintaining public sympathy. Only when I told your parents you would never awaken did these personas briefly merge, revealing the monster I'd become even to myself. Since my imprisonment, I've worked extensively with therapists to understand these compartmentalizations. Not to excuse my actions, but to ensure I never become that person again. The therapy has been brutal but necessary, forcing me to confront not just what I did to you, but who I had to become to do it. You should also know that Dom's violence wasn't limited to our conspiracy against you. During our relationship, he became increasingly controlling and occasionally physically threatening. This doesn't diminish my responsibility. I chose him despite these warning signs, but helps explain why I've been so cooperative against him specifically. The witness protection offer wasn't my suggestion, but I recognize its necessity. Dom will never stop seeking vengeance against those he believes betrayed him, particularly me. The attacks have escalated despite his segregation from general population. Before potentially vanishing forever, I wanted you to know that my cooperation, returned assets, and withdrawn parole application weren't strategic calculations but attempts at partial amends. Nothing can compensate for the trauma I caused, and I don't expect or seek forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that the person who orchestrated your destruction no longer exists in the same way that the man I married no longer exists, both transformed by what happened on that mountain road. If you choose not to respond to this letter, I understand completely. Should witness protection proceed, I'll disappear with the knowledge that you've built something remarkable from the wreckage I created. Restoration Point represents everything I failed to be, constructive rather than destructive, healing rather than harming. Whatever you decide, please know that I will carry the weight of what I did to you for the remainder of my life, regardless of what name I bear or where I exist. It is the one constant that will follow me through any transformation. Adrian. West read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and returned it to the envelope. His reaction wasn't what he might have expected years, or even months, earlier. The rage that had fueled his initial recovery had gradually transformed into something more complex. Sitting at his desk, looking out at the community he'd built from his trauma, West recognized that Adrienne's letter represented both an ending and a choice. He called Lillian, asking her to join him for dinner at his home that evening. "There's something important we need to discuss," he explained, his tone serious enough to prompt her immediate concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "It's complicated," West replied, "but not an emergency. Just a significant decision I need to make." That evening, as they prepared dinner together in his kitchen, West shared the visit from the witness protection representative and the contents of Adrienne's letter. Lillian listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "So she'll disappear completely unless you respond within 48 hours, she summarized after he finished. "What are you considering?" West placed 2 plates on the breakfast bar and sat beside her. "I'm not sure. Part of me thinks closure means letting her vanish without response. The final chapter of a story I didn't choose but have moved beyond. And the other part?" Lillian asked quietly. West considered this carefully. Wonders if true closure might require one final conversation. Not for her benefit, but for mine. A conversation about what? Exactly. "That's what I'm struggling with," West admitted. "Not forgiveness, certainly. Not reconciliation in any meaningful sense. But perhaps acknowledgement of what happened, what's been lost, what's been created since." Lillian took a sip of wine, considering his words. "In my medical practice, I've seen how trauma creates these unresolved loops in patients' minds. Questions that cycle endlessly because they have no answers. Sometimes, the opportunity to close those loops is valuable, regardless of the relationship with the person who caused the trauma. That's it exactly, Wes nodded. There are questions that may never have another opportunity for answers. What does your instinct tell you? Lillian asked. Wes was silent for a moment. I've spent years rebuilding and creating. That restoration point exists because I refuse to be defined solely as a victim of betrayal. That perhaps true strength isn't in cutting all connections to the past, but in being able to face it without being diminished by it. Then I think you have your answer, Lillian replied simply. The following morning, Wes contacted the number provided in the envelope, arranging to meet with Adrian under supervised conditions at the correctional facility. The process required multiple security clearances and approvals given her protected status following the recent attack. 2 days later, Wes found himself being escorted through security checkpoints far more intensive than his previous prison visits. The Witness Protection Program had implemented extraordinary measures to ensure Adrienne's safety, including transferring her to an isolated section of the medical wing with restricted access. The room prepared for their meeting contained a simple table with 2 chairs, a correction officer positioned discreetly in the corner, and surveillance cameras monitoring from multiple angles. Wes had been thoroughly briefed on security protocols and limitations. No physical contact allowed, restricted topics regarding her potential relocation, time constraints strictly enforced. When Adrienne entered, Wes was struck by how fundamentally she had changed. The polished, confident woman who had orchestrated his destruction was gone, replaced by someone physically diminished, yet somehow more substantial. Her prison-issued clothing hung on a frame that had lost its cultivated elegance, and her once perfectly styled hair was now pulled back simply, streaks of premature gray visible throughout. Most notably different were her eyes, the calculated charm replaced by a wary authenticity that suggested she no longer had the energy or inclination for manipulation. West, she acknowledged quietly, taking the seat across from him. A fading bruise from the recent attack was visible along her jawline. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, he replied honestly. An awkward silence stretched between them, the weight of their shared history almost tangible in the sterile room. Thank you for the letter, Wes finally said. It answered questions I've had for a long time. Adrienne nodded slightly. I've had 4 years to reflect on every decision, every justification. Therapy has been illuminating and painful. I didn't come for apologies, Wes clarified, or to offer forgiveness. I know, she replied. Those would be inadequate and presumptuous, respectively. Wes studied her, noting the absence of the performative emotion she had once wielded so effectively. I came because I wanted you to know what happened after I woke up. Not just the legal consequences or financial recovery, but what I built from what you tried to destroy. For the next 30 minutes, Wes described Restoration Point, its conception during his darkest rehabilitation days, its evolution from personal healing project to community resource, the lives being transformed through its innovative approach to recovery. He spoke without bitterness or accusation, simply sharing the reality he had created. Adrienne listened intently, asking occasional questions that reflected genuine interest rather than strategic information gathering. When he described Morgan Chin's journey from initial resident to program director, Adrienne's eyes showed the first hint of emotion. You've created something remarkable, she said when he finished. Something I could never have imagined when we were together. That's precisely the point, Wes replied. What happened on that mountain road was meant to end everything. Instead, it created possibilities I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Adrienne absorbed this without defensiveness. Does that make it easier to live with what I did? No, Wes said honestly. What you did remains unforgivable, but my life isn't defined by it anymore. That's what I wanted you to understand before you potentially disappear forever. She nodded slowly. I've wondered often what you became after everything. The man I married would have been destroyed by this betrayal. The man sitting here created something transformative from it. We both became different people, West acknowledged, though through very different paths. As their allotted time drew to a close, Adrian asked the question that perhaps represented the true purpose of their meeting. If the witness protection proceeds, this is likely our final conversation. Is there anything else you need from me before that happens? Wes considered this carefully. Just an honest answer to one question. The person who planned my death on that mountain road, does she still exist inside you? Adrian held his gaze steadily. No, she's gone. Not through witness protection or new identity, but through confronting exactly who I became and why. The work of unbecoming that person has been the most difficult challenge of my imprisonment. West nodded, accepting the answer without further comment. As the guard indicated their time was ending, he stood to leave. West, Adrian said softly, whatever happens, whether I disappear into protection or serve my remaining sentence under my current identity, I want you to know that I'll never contact you again after today. That choice, at least, I can give back to you. Thank you, he replied simply. As he walked through the series of secure doors leading back to the main visitor processing area, West felt a weight lifting that he hadn't fully recognized was still there. Not forgiveness, that remained beyond possibility, but a different kind of resolution. He had faced his past without being diminished by it, engaged with the architect of his greatest trauma without surrendering his hard-won strength. Outside the prison, spring sunshine had broken through the morning clouds, illuminating the surrounding landscape with unexpected clarity. Wes stood for a moment in the warmth, recognizing that this meeting represented not just closure with Adrian, but the final stage of his own transformation, from survivor focused on recovery to creator oriented toward possibility. He drove directly to Restoration Point, arriving in time for the community's midday gathering. As residents shared their weekly progress and challenges in the central common space, West observed how each journey reflected his own, moving from trauma through recovery toward creation of something new and meaningful. Later, walking the campus pathways with Lillian, he described the prison meeting and its unexpected impact. It felt like closing a circuit, he explained, not forgiveness or reconciliation, but acknowledgement of parallel transformations. She became someone who recognizes the monster she was. I became someone defined by creation rather than victimhood. And now, Lillian asked, slipping her hand into his. West looked across the thriving community, watching Morgan guiding a new resident through adaptive yoga postures on the central lawn. Now we keep building. 3 weeks later, West received a final notification from the witness protection representative. Adrian had been successfully transferred into the program, her former identity officially terminated. No details were provided regarding her new location or identity, just confirmation that she had disappeared from her former life completely. West filed the notification in the same drawer containing her letters and legal documents, artifacts of a history acknowledged but no longer defining. That evening, during dinner with Lillian, he shared his decision regarding the next phase of Restoration Point's development. I've been considering names for the research center expansion, he explained, unfolding preliminary architectural drawings, something that captures its purpose without directly referencing my personal story. Lillian studied the plans with professional interest. What are you thinking? Phoenix Institute, West replied, symbolizing transformation through adversity without explicitly referencing my experience. It's perfect, she agreed, recognizing the significance of this subtle but important distance from his personal trauma narrative. As summer approached, construction began on the Phoenix Institute, representing not just physical expansion but philosophical evolution. From a project conceived through personal recovery to an innovation hub serving broader community needs. West's role shifted accordingly, from founder-director to board chairman, empowering the leadership team he'd assembled to guide operations while he focused on architectural innovations and strategic vision. This transition coincided with developments in his personal life. After 2 years of increasingly serious partnership, West and Lillian decided to formalize their relationship. Rather than traditional marriage, they created a commitment ceremony reflecting their mature perspective, acknowledging past experiences while deliberately choosing shared future. The ceremony took place on Restoration Point's central lawn, attended by residents, staff, West parents, and close friends including Garrett and Agent Holt. No formal vows were exchanged. Instead, they shared mutual statements of intention and commitment, emphasizing transparency, growth, and purposeful partnership. During the reception that followed, Frank Blackwood embraced his son with uncharacteristic emotional openness. "Your mother and I weren't sure we'd ever see you truly happy again," he admitted gruffly. "You've built something remarkable here, not just this place, but this life." "It wasn't the path I would have chosen," West acknowledged, "but I'm grateful for where it led." As summer transitioned to fall, West received notification of a prestigious international award for Restoration Point's architectural innovations. The recognition included substantial grant funding for the Phoenix Institute, accelerating research capabilities beyond original projections. During the award ceremony in Copenhagen, West was asked about the inspiration behind Restoration Point's revolutionary design. His response reflected his completed journey from trauma to transformation. Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about creating spaces that facilitate human potential. Restoration Point emerged from personal experience with recovery, but its true inspiration comes from something universal: our capacity to rebuild not just what was lost, but something better than what existed before. The questioner, unaware of West's personal history, nodded appreciatively at what seemed like philosophical insight rather than lived experience. This anonymity represented perhaps the most meaningful measure of West's transformation. His trauma no longer defined his public identity or professional recognition. Returning from Copenhagen, West found Restoration Point thriving under its expanded leadership team. Morgan Chun had been promoted to Resident Services Director, implementing innovative programs based on her personal recovery journey. The community had grown to 36 residents, with the Phoenix Institute attracting renowned researchers focused on adaptive architecture and rehabilitation innovations. For West, this flourishing beyond his direct control represented the most satisfying aspect of his creation. It had developed self-sustaining momentum, no longer dependent on his trauma narrative or personal oversight. Like a well-designed building, it stood on its own foundation, shaped by his vision but not limited by it. During this period, occasional updates regarding the federal cases stemming from his original situation arrived through Agent Holt. Dom remained in maximum security, his continued attempts to orchestrate external threats, resulting in additional charges and restrictions. The financial recovery process had concluded with approximately 80% of assets restored through various legal mechanisms. These updates, once central to West's recovery focus, now registered as peripheral information, acknowledged but no longer defining his daily consciousness or future planning. The final such notification arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly 5 years after his awakening in the hospital room. Final case report. All federal prosecutions concluded. Asset recovery complete within legal parameters. Case officially closed. West filed the document with the others, then turned his attention to preliminary designs for an international expansion of the Restoration Point concept, a project in partnership with a European Rehabilitation Center interested in implementing the adaptive architecture model. That evening, during a community gathering celebrating Restoration Point's second anniversary, West found himself observing rather than directing proceedings. Residents managed the event themselves, with Morgan coordinating presentations highlighting individual and collective achievements. Lillian joined him on the observation deck, overlooking the celebration. "You're unusually quiet tonight," she noted. "Just appreciating the view," West replied, indicating the thriving community below. 5 years ago today, I woke up in that hospital room to find Adrian and Dom being arrested. Everything since has been rebuilding from that moment. And now?" Lillian asked, echoing their frequent check-in question. West smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes. "Now I'm ready for the next chapter, one that isn't defined by what was destroyed, but by what we're creating together." Below them, Morgan was introducing a new adaptive sports program, her enthusiasm infectious as she demonstrated equipment modifications for various mobility challenges. Residents gathered around, their focus entirely forward-looking, exactly as West had designed the community to facilitate. That's the real achievement, West observed quietly. Not the buildings or awards, but creating a place where people define themselves by possibility rather than limitation. Lillian squeezed his hand knowingly. Just as you have. As darkness fell, the community gathering transitioned to a lantern ceremony. Each resident launching a paper lantern representing personal milestones achieved and goals still pursued. The glowing lights ascended into the night sky, creating constellations of individual journeys united in shared purpose. West and Lillian joined the ceremony, releasing their own lanterns into the gentle breeze. As he watched his lantern join the others, West reflected on the distance traveled from that mountain road, not just physically or professionally, but emotionally and spiritually. The woman who had orchestrated his destruction had inadvertently catalyzed his transformation. The betrayal meant to end his story had instead sparked an entirely new narrative, one richer and more purposeful than might otherwise have evolved. This understanding represented the final piece of West's recovery journey, the recognition that trauma, while never deserved or justified, could be integrated rather than merely survived. The experience that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately revealed capacities for resilience, innovation, and compassion that might otherwise have remained dormant. As the lanterns ascended into the darkness, their collective light illuminating the campus below, West embraced this paradox with hard-earned wisdom, that sometimes the greatest destruction creates possibility for the most meaningful creation, and that the journey from betrayal to transformation ultimately leads not back to what was lost, but forward to what could never have been imagined. Chapter 9. Transformation. 5 years to the day after Restoration Point welcomed its first residents, West stood on the ceremonial platform addressing a crowd that represented the full spectrum of the community's impact: current and former residents, medical partners, architectural collaborators, and representatives from 3 international implementations of the adaptive design concept. When we broke ground on this campus, West began, his voice carrying across the assembled gathering. We described it as a place for recovery. What we've discovered together is something more profound. That true healing isn't about returning to what was, but evolving into what can be. The audience, intimately familiar with this philosophy through lived experience, responded with knowing appreciation. Among them sat Morgan Shun, now Restoration Point's executive director, her remarkable journey from initial resident to organizational leader embodying the community's transformative potential. Today we celebrate not just 5 years of operation, West continued, but the inauguration of the Global Restoration Institute, expanding our research and implementation capabilities to serve communities worldwide. He gestured toward the striking new building behind him, a seamless integration of cutting-edge sustainability features and adaptive architecture principles, designed to serve as both research hub and teaching facility for international practitioners. The structure represented the evolution of concepts first developed during West's own recovery, now refined through years of practical application and resident feedback. As West concluded his remarks and the formal ribbon-cutting commenced, he felt a profound sense of completion, not of the work itself, which would continue evolving, but of his personal journey from victim to creator. The Institute represented the final transition from a project born of personal trauma to a self-sustaining innovation ecosystem with global impact. During the reception that followed, West found himself approached by a distinguished visitor he hadn't expected, Judge Martha Okafor, who had presided over Adrian and Dom's original sentencing. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with dignified warmth, "I hope my attendance isn't unwelcome." The invitation came through mutual connections at the Justice Department. "Not at all," West assured her, genuinely pleased by her presence. "Your fair handling of a complex case was instrumental in my eventual recovery." The judge nodded appreciatively. "I've followed the development of Restoration Point with great interest. It represents exactly the kind of transformative response to trauma that our justice system aspires to but rarely achieves." That's high praise, West replied, though I suspect my path was somewhat unconventional. The best ones usually are, she noted with a slight smile. After a moment's hesitation, she added, I thought you might want to know that Mr. Vega passed away last month. Complications from a chronic condition exacerbated by prison conditions. West absorbed this information with surprising neutrality. I hadn't heard. It was kept relatively quiet, the judge explained. Given his continued attempts to orchestrate external threats, authorities were concerned about potential posthumous instructions to associates. And were there any? West asked, more from intellectual curiosity than personal concern. None discovered so far, she replied. His influence appeared to have diminished considerably in recent years. West nodded, recognizing that the information represented another chapter closing, though one that generated neither satisfaction nor regret, simply acknowledgement. Dom had become increasingly irrelevant to West's life and consciousness, a historical figure rather than active threat or significant presence. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. As Judge Okafor moved on to greet other attendees, Lillian joined West, noting his thoughtful expression. Everything all right? Dom died in prison last month, he explained quietly. Judge Okafor just informed me. Lillian studied him carefully. How do you feel about that? West considered the question seriously. Strangely disconnected, like hearing about a historical figure rather than someone who once tried to destroy my life. That's a measure of how completely you've moved forward, Lillian observed. His death doesn't define anything for you anymore. This perspective crystallized something West had been gradually recognizing, that true recovery wasn't measured by justice served or wrongs righted, but by the diminishing emotional impact of the original trauma. Dom's death registered as information rather than emotional watershed, confirming how thoroughly West had transcended the betrayal narrative. The celebration continued into evening, transitioning from formal ceremony to community gathering. Resident performances showcased adaptive arts programs, while interactive exhibits demonstrated technological innovations developed through the Phoenix Institute over the previous years. During this more relaxed portion of the event, West found himself approached by Dr. Kenneth Wu, a neurologist who had been among the first medical professionals to collaborate with Restoration Point. Now director of his own rehabilitation center in Seattle, Dr. Wu had implemented many of the adaptive design principles pioneered at Restoration Point. I've been meaning to share something remarkable with you, Dr. Wu said after exchanging pleasantries. A patient of mine mentioned knowing you under unusual circumstances. I'm not at liberty to share specific details, but she indicated you might understand the reference to the mountain road. West felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. When was this? About 8 months ago, Dr. Wu replied. She was admitted for rehabilitation following complications from a previous injury. Nothing life-threatening, but requiring extensive physical therapy. She since completed treatment and relocated. Did she say anything else? West asked carefully. Dr. Wu shook his head. Just that seeing our implementation of your design concepts confirmed something important for her. That transformation can be genuine and complete. West nodded thoughtfully, understanding the message that had been deliberately conveyed through this chance connection. Adrian, or whoever she had become through witness protection, had experienced firsthand the healing environment his trauma had inspired, and wanted him to know that her own transformation continued in parallel to his. The information required no response or action. It simply completed a circle of awareness between two people whose lives had been irrevocably connected and then deliberately separated. Like Dom's death, it registered not as emotional disruption, but as narrative completion, another thread tied off in a story West had moved beyond. Later that evening, as the celebration concluded and most guests departed, West walked the illuminated campus pathways with Lillian, reflecting on the day's events and unexpected revelations. Do you think she did it deliberately? Lillian asked regarding Dr. Wu's message. Placing herself in a facility implementing your designs? Possibly, West acknowledged. Or perhaps it was coincidence that became meaningful once she recognized the connection. Does it matter to you either way? West considered this carefully. Not in the way it once might have. It's just another confirmation that all parties have moved forward on their separate paths. This perspective reflected how thoroughly West had integrated the traumatic chapter of his life, acknowledging its reality and impact without allowing it to dominate his present consciousness or future orientation. The betrayal had become historical context rather than defining narrative, informing but not limiting who he had become. As they reached the central plaza, now quiet after the day's activities, West paused to observe the campus from this vantage point. Each building represented a specific aspect of his recovery journey. The initial residential units born from his earliest rehabilitation experiences, the community center embodying connection as essential to healing, the Phoenix Institute manifesting research and innovation emerging from adversity. "I've been thinking about next steps," West said after a comfortable silence. "Both professionally and personally." "What kind of steps?" Lillian asked. With the Global Institute launched and Morgan fully capable of leading operations here, I'm considering focusing more exclusively on international implementations. He turned to face her directly, including significant time at the Copenhagen and Singapore sites during their development phases. Lillian smiled, immediately understanding the implicit question. "Are you asking if I consider relocating temporarily to support those projects?" "More than temporarily," West clarified. "I'm thinking about a different approach to life and work going forward. Less centralized, more nomadic, creating impact across multiple communities rather than remaining tethered to this one. Embracing transformation as ongoing rather than completed," Lillian observed insightfully. "Exactly," West nodded. "Restoration Point will always remain our foundation, but perhaps the next chapter involves building multiple versions rather than continuously expanding this one." As they discussed possibilities, West recognized that this conversation represented the final evolution of his recovery journey, from surviving betrayal to rebuilding what was destroyed to creating beyond original parameters. The capacity to envision future possibilities unconstrained by past trauma represented the most meaningful measure of his transformation. The following morning, West convened the Restoration Point leadership team to discuss his evolving role and the organization's future direction. Morgan, now fully established as executive director, received his proposal for a more globally focused contribution with characteristic pragmatism. "The timing makes sense," she acknowledged. "The community is stable, the institute is launched, and international implementations need your direct architectural expertise more than we need day-to-day involvement here." Other team members expressed similar support, each having developed specialized expertise that collectively ensured the organization's continued flourishing. What had begun as West's personal healing project had evolved into a self-sustaining ecosystem of innovation and recovery, precisely the outcome he had ultimately hoped to achieve. 2 months later, West and Lillian departed for Copenhagen to oversee groundbreaking for the European implementation of Restoration Point. The Danish version incorporated cultural adaptations while maintaining core adaptive architecture principles, reflecting West's evolving philosophy that true innovation required contextual flexibility rather than rigid replication. On the evening before groundbreaking, they walked along Copenhagen's picturesque Nyhavn Canal, discussing the project's unique features and potential impact. As they paused to observe the colorful historic buildings reflected in the water, West was struck by how completely his life had transformed from that fateful day on the mountain road. "I was thinking about something Morgan said before we left," he commented, watching boats navigate the canal. "That my greatest contribution wasn't the architectural innovations or even founding Restoration Point, but demonstrating that traumatic endings can become transformative beginnings." Lillian considered this thoughtfully. She's right in a way. The buildings and programs are remarkable, but your personal journey provides the underlying narrative that inspires others. From intended victim to global innovator. West nodded, acknowledging the truth in this observation. The irony isn't lost on me. Adrian and Dom tried to erase everything I'd built, but their actions ultimately led to creating something with far greater impact than I might otherwise have achieved. Not despite the trauma, but because of how you responded to it, Lillian emphasized. That's the distinction that matters. As they continued their walk, West reflected on the long journey from that hospital room where he had awakened to find federal agents arresting his would-be killers. Each step of recovery, physical rehabilitation, financial restoration, professional rebuilding, emotional healing, had contributed to the person he had become and the global impact he now created. The transformation hadn't erased the trauma or justified the betrayal. Nothing could do that, but it had integrated these experiences into a life story characterized by resilience, innovation, and purpose rather than victimhood or vengeance. The following day, as West addressed the assembled dignitaries and medical partners at the Copenhagen groundbreaking, he articulated this perspective as the philosophical foundation for the expanding Restoration Point network. Transformation doesn't erase difficult experiences. It builds meaning from them. Each of our centers begins with this understanding that recovery isn't about returning to what was, but about creating what can be. The structures we build simply provide the architecture for this profoundly human journey. As ceremonial shovels broke ground for the European campus, West felt the completion of a circle that had begun with his own broken body being pulled from the wreckage of a car. The journey from that moment to this one represented not just personal recovery, but evolution beyond recovery into creation, the ultimate response to those who had sought his destruction. In the years that followed, West continued this evolution, dividing time between restoration points, expanding international implementations, and the original campus that remained both home base and innovation laboratory. The network gradually expanded to include 7 locations across 4 continents, each adapting core principles to specific cultural and environmental contexts. Throughout this period, West and Lillian maintained their partnership, their complementary strengths creating a foundation for both personal fulfillment and professional impact. Their relationship, built on transparency and purpose rather than romantic idealization, provided stability amid constant travel and innovation challenges. On rare occasions, indirect news regarding Adrienne's post-protection life reached West through filtered channels, always respecting established boundaries while acknowledging their irrevocable connection. These updates required no response, but confirmed parallel journeys of transformation, continuing on separate paths. A decade after his awakening in the hospital room, West returned to Restoration Point for its milestone anniversary celebration. The campus had evolved significantly under Morgan's leadership, maintaining core principles while implementing continuous innovations based on resident experiences and research outcomes. During the anniversary gala, West was presented with a leather-bound volume documenting personal stories from over 200 former residents whose lives had been transformed through the adaptive community. Each narrative represented a unique journey from trauma through recovery to creation, echoing and expanding his own path. As he accepted this unexpected gift, West was struck by how thoroughly his personal experience had been transformed into collective impact, from individual tragedy to global innovation ecosystem. What Adrienne and Dom had intended as his ending had instead catalyzed multiple new beginnings, not just for himself, but for hundreds of others navigating their own recovery journeys. This recognition represented the completion of West's transformation, from Weston Blackwood, victim of betrayal, to West Blackwood, architect of restoration. The trauma remained part of his history, acknowledged but no longer defining. The betrayal had been integrated rather than erased, transformed from destructive ending into creative beginning. Standing before the gathered community that had grown from his response to trauma, West offered what had become his defining perspective, the philosophy that had emerged from his journey from Mountain Road to global innovation. True transformation doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It means building something so meaningful from the experience that it becomes foundation rather than limitation. This community represents that possibility for all of us, that our most difficult moments can become catalysts for our most significant contributions. As applause filled the hall, West surveyed the gathering with profound gratitude, not for the betrayal that had nearly ended his life, but for the resilience that had transformed destruction into creation, trauma into purpose, an intended ending into remarkable beginning. The journey from that hospital room to this milestone moment had never been about returning to what was lost, but about creating what could never have been imagined, a legacy of transformation that would continue evolving long after the betrayal that catalyzed it had faded into distant memory. In that completion, West found the ultimate response to those who had sought his destruction. Not vengeance or even justice, but transformation so complete and impactful that their actions had paradoxically enabled his greatest contribution. And in that transformation lay the most powerful truth of his journey, that while we cannot control what happens to us, we retain the ultimate authority over what we create from it, turning even the most devastating betrayals into foundations for something more meaningful than what was destroyed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.